Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. Story 1. My name is Julia, and this happened to me when I was 16 years old. I lived with my mother in a small house on the outskirts of a medium-sized city, in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows each other by name. At the time, my mother worked the night shift as a nurse, so I was used to staying home alone until morning. It was nothing out of the ordinary for me. That particular night, I remember being in my room, lying on my stomach on the bed, scrolling through my phone with the lights off. It was late, maybe around 2 in the morning. I had put on a movie, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. The house was so silent that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator motor in the kitchen. And then, suddenly, a different noise made me freeze. A dry, sharp sound, like someone had tried to force the front door handle. My heart immediately started racing. I froze, listening intently, holding my breath. My first thought was that maybe my mother had come home early, but that didn't make sense. She never did that without letting me know. Then came another sound, clearer this time. The slow, dragging creak of the door opening. Someone had come inside. I can't explain the sheer terror that took hold of me in that moment. I couldn't move. My body felt glued to the bed. I forced myself to act before it was too late. Grabbing my phone without thinking much, I scrolled to the dialer and pressed 911. I slid off the bed and hid underneath it, curling up as tightly as I could, pressing the phone against my chest while it rang. When the operator answered, I whispered so softly that I thought she might not hear me. "Someone broke into my house." She said something on the other end, but I could barely make it out. My own heartbeat was pounding so loudly in my ears that I thought I might pass out. "Where are you right now?" she asked, trying to keep me calm. I curled up even tighter, pressing my face against the cold floor. "In my room, under the bed," I whispered, terrified that any sound would be too loud. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, dragging, heavy. They came from the living room and started moving toward the hallway. The wooden floor creaked with each step, as if the intruder was carefully exploring the house, taking his time. I tried to hold my breath, but my body was trembling so much that I felt the mattress above me vibrate slightly. "Is there anyone else upstairs?" The operator kept talking, trying to keep me on the line, but I couldn't respond. My bedroom door creaked as it opened slowly. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the sound was unmistakable. And then, the footsteps entered. Close. Too close. My gaze was fixed on the small gap between the floor and the mattress, and that's when I saw them. First, the shoes, old boots covered in dry dirt. Then, the hem of worn-out jeans, ripped at the ankle. The intruder was standing right beside my bed. He wasn't moving, just standing there, as if he knew, as if he was waiting for me to make a sound. I pressed my phone against my chest so hard that my fingers ached. The silence in the room was suffocating, and I knew that if the operator said anything else, he might hear. My eyes were glued to the stranger's feet. He didn't move, but I could feel it. His presence was a crushing weight in the air. My mind screamed at me not to move, not to breathe, not to exist. Then I heard a horrible sound, the dry crack of knuckles. He was slowly clenching and unclenching his hand, as if he was thinking about what to do next. I wanted to scream, to run, but any movement could mean the difference between escaping or being found. Suddenly, a noise in the house broke the silence. A distant sound from the kitchen, like something had fallen to the floor. The intruder turned his head in the direction of the noise, and I saw his boot step backward. My heart leaped. Who else was here besides us? The operator took advantage of the pause to speak, her voice still low but firm. "The police are on their way. Stay with me." But I couldn't answer. The man took another step back, then another. My blood ran cold when I realized what he was about to do. He crouched down, slowly, as if he knew exactly where to look. First, I saw his knees bend, then his waist lowering, and then his face. That's when I saw his face, or what should have been a face. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The skin looked stretched in a strange way, as if it didn't belong to him. His eyes were too deep, too dark. His mouth was slightly open and his teeth were crooked, as if they had been placed there carelessly. A shiver ran down my spine. The way he looked at me wasn't one of surprise at having found me. It was something worse, as if he had known I was there all along, as if he was just playing with me. My whole body collapsed in terror, and before I could react, he did something that paralyzed me completely. He smiled. Not a normal smile, but something wrong, distorted, as if his skin didn't quite know how to move to form that expression. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My muscles were locked. My chest burned from lack of air. The man slowly reached out his hand, his thin, dirty fingers almost touching my face. That's when, on the other end of the line, the operator shouted, "The police are arriving. They're already there." The man froze. For a second, a long second, he just stared at me. Then out of nowhere, he stood up in a strange, almost mechanical way and left the room. I heard his footsteps retreating, the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Then, silence. All that remained was the distant sound of sirens growing louder outside. I didn't know if he was still in the house. Every second felt like an eternity. Still under the bed, my breathing was short and ragged, my body trembling uncontrollably. All I could do was listen, trying to catch any sound that would tell me where he was. Then the noise came, something slamming against the back door. Once, twice, then silence again. The sound of sirens was loud now, red and blue lights flashing against my bedroom walls. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I heard someone shouting outside, "Police!" Only then did my muscles give in, and the sob I had been holding in burst out of me. It took me a while to crawl out from under the bed, even after a police officer entered my room and called for me. My legs were weak, and all I could do was shake as they helped me up. The house was ransacked, drawers open, furniture dragged around, as if he had been searching for something, but he was no longer there. The back door was wide open, and the muddy footprints he left led straight into the woods behind my house. What terrified me the most was what the police found in the hallway, right next to my door. A small pocket knife, open, its blade stained with something dark. They said he probably ran when he heard the sirens, but something told me he wasn't in a hurry, that he had already done what he wanted that night. After that night, my life was never the same. My mother had to change shifts because I could no longer stay home alone. I couldn't sleep properly, waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling that he was still there, watching me. The police never found the intruder. No security cameras in the neighborhood captured anything besides shadows moving between the trees. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked when they arrived, as if he knew exactly how to get in without making a sound. But the worst part came weeks later. One of the officers came to our house to talk to me and my mother. He was holding a plastic bag with something inside. My phone. It had been found miles away, discarded on a dirt road. The screen was cracked but still turned on. When they checked the call log, they found something that sent a chill down my spine. My call to 911 was still there, recorded, but there was another call right before it. A call made just minutes before I hid under the bed. It was an unknown number. And when they checked the timestamp, they discovered something that made me want to vomit. The call had been made from my own phone. Story 2. My name is Daniel, and I've been a police officer for almost 10 years. I've seen a lot of strange things in that time, but only a few scenes still haunt me to this day. This happened on a cold November night, right after Halloween. I was on patrol when we received an unusual call. An elderly woman, a resident of a quiet neighborhood in the city, called 911 saying that something was wrong at her neighbor's house. According to her, there was a mannequin in the front yard, standing there for days without moving. At first, I thought it was just another leftover Halloween decoration. Many people left props scattered around their yards. But something in the woman's voice put me on high alert. She didn't just sound concerned. She sounded terrified. My partner and I drove to the address. When we arrived, the house was completely dark, with no signs of movement inside. The front yard was covered in dry leaves, and we quickly spotted the so-called mannequin. It was there, motionless, right in the middle of the lawn. From the patrol car, it really did look like a dummy. It was dressed in regular clothes, dark jeans and a black hoodie. Its skin had a strange pale tone, like cheap plastic left exposed to the elements. Its arms were stiffly spread to the sides in an unnatural, rigid way, and its head was tilted forward. For a moment, we almost turned back, thinking it was just another Halloween prank that no one had bothered to remove. But something was off. Something about it, about him, was wrong. We got out of the car and slowly walked toward the yard. With each step, the thing looked stranger. The way its head slumped forward didn't seem natural, even for a mannequin. There was no base or support holding it up, yet it remained completely still, even with the cold wind blowing hard. My partner took out his flashlight and shined it on the figure's face, and at that moment the night's chill seemed to intensify. The mannequin wasn't a dummy. It was a person. The skin was pale and lifeless, the lips bluish, the eyes half open, staring blankly into nothingness. A real man, dead for days, completely stiff, posed as if he were nothing more than a grotesque decoration in someone's yard. I swallowed hard and took a step back. My partner muttered a curse and immediately called for backup over the radio. The whole scene was absurd. Who would place a body like this in plain sight without trying to hide it? And why had no one noticed before? What was even more bizarre was that, despite receiving only one call about it, the house was on a busy street. People passed by every day. How had no one realized it was a corpse? My mind spun with unanswered questions as we examined the body. The way it was positioned, the way the muscles were stiff and contracted. Someone had deliberately placed this man here like this, like a message. The forensic team arrived within minutes, and only when they started examining the body did we notice something even more disturbing. The dead man's arms were held in place with thin wire, wrapped so tightly that it cut into the skin. His neck had marks, indicating that his head had been forcibly bent forward and secured in that position. Whoever had done this didn't just want to hide a body. They wanted it to look exactly the way it did. A grotesque mannequin, displayed for anyone to see but invisible to those who weren't paying attention. What sent an even worse chill down my spine was realizing that the position he was in wasn't random. His vacant eyes were staring directly at the house across the street. The elderly woman who had called 911 was watching us from her window, pale as a ghost. I decided to go talk to her to understand what she knew. When I knocked on her door, she opened it almost immediately, as if she had been waiting. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I knew something was wrong. He was watching me. My stomach twisted. "Did you see anyone put him there?" I asked, but she shook her head. "No, he just appeared. One night he wasn't there. The next morning he was." A heavy silence filled the air. That meant whoever had done this had done it during the night, without anyone seeing or hearing anything. I returned to the yard, my mind racing. Something about the scene deeply unsettled me. The body had been placed there deliberately, like a warning. But for whom? For the woman who reported it? For anyone passing by the street? The thought that someone could be watching all of this from somewhere nearby made me uneasy. My partner was talking to the forensic team, and one of them pointed out an even more chilling detail. The man had been dead for at least 3 days, but there were no obvious signs of decomposition, no strong smell, which was extremely unusual for a body left exposed outdoors. It was almost as if someone had been taking care of him, preserving him to look like a doll for longer. When we checked the dead man's pockets, we found something that only made everything more disturbing. A small folded note tucked inside the hoodie. The paper was damp and stained, but the message was still legible, written in shaky handwriting. "He's still around." My partner looked at me, and I saw the same chill run down his spine as it did mine. Whoever had done this wanted us to know that it wasn't over, that maybe we were being watched right that very moment. That message put me on high alert. My partner and I started scanning the area, trying to spot any unusual movement. The surrounding houses were dark and silent, but the feeling that someone was watching us was too strong to be paranoia. The forensic team continued their work while we started knocking on doors to see if anyone had noticed anything in the past few days. Most people hadn't seen anything unusual, just a few neighbors who, now that we mentioned it, vaguely remembered the mannequin in the yard but had never paid much attention to it. That's when a crucial detail emerged. A resident at the end of the street mentioned that the night before, around 3 in the morning, he had heard a car stopping near the house. But when he looked out the window, he could only see a tall, thin shadow standing next to the body before disappearing into the darkness. The following days were chaotic. We investigated thoroughly but couldn't trace where the body had come from or who might have placed it there. No cameras, no clear witnesses, no solid leads. The strangest part, the owner of the house where the body was found had been out of town. He only found out about everything when he returned and saw his yard turned into a crime scene. That meant whoever did this chose that location on purpose. But why? Who was the dead man? Who was the shadow that left him there? These questions still haunt me. I wanted to believe it was an isolated case, a senseless crime, but there's something about this story that never sat right with me. A few weeks later, while on a night patrol, I received an anonymous text on my phone. No number, just a short message. 3 words that made my blood run cold. I see you. Story 3. My name is Carolina, and I'm a social worker who collaborates with the police on child neglect cases. I deal with many difficult situations, but nothing compares to what happened that night. It was a Friday, a little after 11 at night, when I received a call from the police station. The dispatcher explained that a neighbor had called the police because a baby had been crying non-stop in one of the apartments in the building next door. The neighbors knocked on the door, called for the mother, but no one answered. Since I was on duty, I was called to accompany the patrol and assess the situation. I thought it would be just another routine case, irresponsible parents, maybe an exhausted mother who had fallen asleep. I was wrong. When we arrived at the building, the crying still echoed through the hallways. It was a sharp, desperate sound, the kind that makes your spine tingle. The officer with me knocked hard on the door. "Police, is anyone there?" No response. The baby kept crying. We tried a few more times before he decided to break the door open. The crack of the lock snapping echoed through the dark apartment, and there he was. In the middle of the room, a wooden crib swayed slightly, as if someone had just stepped away from it. Inside, a baby no older than a year was crying so hard that his face had turned red. But what truly sent a chill through my blood was the rest of the apartment. There was no one else there. No sign of the mother. No sign that anyone had left in a hurry. Everything was exactly in its place, as if she had simply disappeared. My first instinct was to pick up the baby to calm him. He was hot, sweaty from crying so much, and trembling as if he were scared. I looked around while the officer checked the other rooms. The kitchen light was on, and there was a full baby bottle sitting on the table, still warm to the touch. The mother's phone lay beside it. The screen cracked as if it had been dropped on the floor. The keys were near the door. Everything indicated that she hadn't left the house. So where the hell had she gone? My heart tightened as I noticed another strange detail. The baby stroller was in the corner of the living room, and the fabric on the seat was slightly indented, as if someone had been sitting there just moments ago, but there was no one else besides us. The officer returned, shaking his head. Nothing, no sign of the mother. We looked at the baby, who was now sobbing softly against my chest, finally beginning to calm down. Something was very wrong here. Whatever had happened, this wasn't just a simple case of abandonment. I walked through the apartment, looking for any clues, and when I entered the woman's bedroom, a shiver ran down my spine. The blankets were thrown to the side, as if someone had gotten up in a hurry. But the most bizarre detail was on the wall beside the bed. There were long, deep scratches running from the top of the wall almost to the floor, as if someone had been dragged out of there. My throat went dry. I've seen it all in this job. Cases of neglect, domestic violence, disappearances. But this was different. The scratches on the wall didn't look normal. They were too deep, as if nails, or something even sharper, had been forcefully dug in. The officer noticed them too and stepped closer to inspect. "This doesn't look right," he murmured, running his fingers over the marks. My heart was pounding. I picked up the mother's phone from the table and tried to turn it on. The cracked screen lit up for a moment before showing the battery was dead. But before it shut off, I saw something that made me shudder. The voice recording app was open. With a knot in my stomach, I plugged the phone into a charger that was already in the outlet. When it powered on, I went straight to the audio files. The most recent recording was from that very night, around 3 in the morning. The baby began to stir in my arms, restless, as if he sensed something in the air. I looked at the officer, and he nodded. I pressed play. The audio began with a dense, almost electric silence. Then, the mother's voice, panting, whispering, "Someone's here." A loud thud, the sound of something being dragged, the baby's muffled cries, and then a sound that made me want to turn off the phone immediately. A dry crack followed by a low murmur, almost inhuman. Something was there with her that night. And then the recording ended. We stood frozen, staring at the phone as if it could somehow give us more answers, but there was nothing else. No other audio, no messages, nothing that explained what had happened to that woman. The officer took the phone and sent the recording to forensics, while I tried to ignore the chill creeping up my spine. The baby was calmer now, but was still gripping my blouse tightly, as if refusing to be left alone. I understood the feeling. The silence in the apartment was suffocating. Something told me that if we listened to that recording again, we would find something hidden in the background noise, something that perhaps we were better off not understanding. And then, it happened. Out of nowhere, the officer's radio crackled with loud static, followed by a strange interference. It wasn't just regular static or common frequency noise. It was something different, a low, dragging sound, almost like breathing. The officer reached for his radio, trying to adjust the frequency, but the interference only got worse. And then, in the middle of that distorted noise, a single word formed, spoken in a rough, warped tone, almost unrecognizable: leave. I felt the blood drain from my face. The officer immediately pulled out his gun and looked around, but there was no one there except us. The baby, who had been calmer before, suddenly started crying again, this time with a desperation that made me want to run out of there that very second. The officer and I exchanged a look. I saw in his eyes that he felt the same thing I did. We were not alone there. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it pulsing in my ears. Without saying a word, he motioned for me to step back toward the door, gripping his gun tightly as he checked the corners of the apartment. Every shadow seemed to move. The silence felt wrong, heavy, as if something was there with us, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I pressed the baby against me and took a deep breath, fighting the irrational urge to run. And then we heard it, a noise from the hallway. A slow creak, like someone was pushing the bedroom door open ever so slightly. The officer turned immediately, shining his flashlight into the room. But there was nothing, just the unmade bed, the slightly open wardrobe, and those deep scratches on the wall. But I swear on everything that is sacred, for a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw something in the dimness of the room. Something small, hunched over, with skin so pale it almost blended into the wall. But when the flashlight beam hit it, there was nothing there anymore. The officer muttered a curse under his breath, pulled out his radio, and called for backup. "Something's wrong here," he said. "Very wrong." The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The baby whimpered softly against my chest but seemed exhausted, as if the whole nightmare had drained his strength. The officer kept his gun aimed at the hallway, his eyes scanning for any movement. I wanted to believe I had imagined that shadow in the room, that my mind was just playing tricks on me out of fear. But then came the smell, a strange, sour odor, like damp, rotting flesh left exposed to the air. It didn't come from the crib or the baby. It seemed to seep from the very air, spreading through the apartment. Before we could react, a loud bang came from the hallway. The bedroom door slammed so hard that the echo reverberated through the entire apartment. I screamed, instinctively curling against the wall, shielding the baby. The officer moved instantly, rushing to the bedroom and pushing the door open again, gun raised. But the room was empty. The window was closed, the curtains completely still. He looked at me, breathing heavily. "Enough. We're leaving. Now." I didn't argue. Holding the baby tightly in my arms, I ran toward the front door while the officer covered our exit. Only when we crossed the doorway into the corridor and felt the cold night air, did I realize I had been holding my breath the entire time. As soon as we stepped outside, another patrol car arrived. 2 officers got out, ready to reinforce the situation. But one look at me holding the baby and at my partner's grim expression was enough for them to realize something was very wrong. The officer quickly explained what had happened but left out the more inexplicable details. The mother is missing. The apartment was locked from the inside, and there's something very wrong in there, he said, his jaw tense. The other officers looked at us skeptically but nodded. entering the apartment while I walked away, trying to calm my racing heart. I stood outside, the baby still clinging to me, feeling the cold night air against my skin, burning with adrenaline. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. There was something in that building that couldn't be explained. Something that didn't want us there. And above all, something that had taken that woman from inside her home without signs of struggle, without a single trace of her escape. What disturbed me the most was the note one of the officers found pinned to the crib's wall, a crumpled piece of paper, as if someone had gripped it tightly. On it, written in shaky handwriting, were just 3 words: "He comes at night." That night, I took the baby to the hospital while the police continued their investigation in the apartment. He was physically fine, with no signs of malnutrition or mistreatment, but the doctors noticed something strange. Despite the constant crying we had heard, the baby was now eerily silent, just staring at the ceiling with wide eyes, as if he were waiting for something. I tried to feed him, but he refused the bottle. The doctor suggested it was just shock, but I felt there was something more, as if he knew this wasn't over yet. In the following days, the police investigated every detail of the mother's disappearance. No signs of forced entry, no neighbors saw or heard anything, except for the baby's cries. Her phone had no recent calls, and records showed that no one had entered or left the building that night. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The case went cold far too quickly, as if no one wanted to dig any deeper. The baby was placed in temporary care, and I tried to move on with my work, but something haunted me. A few nights later, at home, I woke up with a horrible feeling, like something was in my room. I turned over slowly and my heart stopped. On my phone screen there was a notification, an anonymous message, no sender, just 2 words: "He came."